Hello, everybody. This is Blake, Director of Community over here at Netdata, coming to you live today from Las Vegas, city where there's never anything dull. There's never a dull moment, right? And speaking of never a dull moment, today we've got an amazing panel lined up for us where we're going to be talking about engineering things in the cloud and all that sort of good thing. Only thing I'll note on our side over on Netdata, we just launched our GitHub discussions. I'll put a link to that in chat. And just really thanking everybody from around the world for joining us. If you've got questions, put those into the chat. We'll try to speak to them. We'll have a Q&A at the end, so stick around for that as well. And also just in the chat, let us know where you're joining us from. So if you're any part of the world, things like that. I'm just really excited to have everybody watching from around the world. And without further ado, I will kick it over to someone who has probably the best sense of humor and one of the most experienced people that I've ever met, and our very own Ralph out of the Netherlands. So, Ralph, take it away. I can't wait for this amazing show today. And thanks to Aaron and Grace for being here.
Thank you, Blake, for the kind introduction there. I'm Ralph, VP of Technology at Netdata, and I'm very happy to have our guests on the show today, Aaron and Grace. Why don't you introduce yourselves a little bit, and then we'll start talking about some interesting stuff here. Grace, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your introduction. I'm Grace Lian from Intel. So I work in Intel Oregon. So I'm leading a global team actually working on the cloud software engineering, very much focused on the open source cloud and open source cloud native and cloud infrastructure and upstream development, lots of community activity as well. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Aaron?
Yeah, good morning. For me, good morning. I'm Aaron. I'm an engineering manager at Netflix on our compute platform team, which is responsible for our container platform as well as some of our lower level OS engineering pieces.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So let's just get started right away. Working in cloud, we have a very audience, people that are just starting out with cloud, small startups, larger corporations that are using Netdata. But what they all have in common is that they, in one way or another, come in contact with cloud services, having to develop for them or against them. And one of the key things for most of them is what should I not do? What are some nice examples from your respective companies where you would say, well, we did this, it's not a good idea. Let's try and avoid that. So who wants to take the first one?
Maybe Aaron, you can start first.
I was going to say, Grace, feel free to go ahead. I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, so cloud, to me, cloud is for this mega technology trend for several many years already, right? And but particularly cloud native, we see this changing the software from monolithic architecture to the microservice architecture. That definitely is still ongoing and will be ongoing with lots of usage and applications. So I can talk more from like the open source perspective. There's so many or huge, community has been moving forward, and that's amazing collaboration opportunities and for all the developer software engineer to join, and also very much like you can leverage a lot technology and also the talents and expertise from the community. So yeah, so that's my first feeling regarding the cloud software. And also I think cloud also have a lot of ingredient or components, and also many of them actually are tested and deployed broadly in the huge deployment. So it's very, very mature. It's not purely open source like testing thing. It's really much mature and proved to be in all these different CSP or multi-cloud or different stack in the enterprise and in other IT industry as well. So I think really look at the resource and how your company can use. I think that will be my advice to you as well, to leverage, and instead of reinvent from things, the challenge may already be solved, and or be similar thing happened with similar application that you can use and leverage as well. So yeah.
Okay, Aaron.
Yeah, from thinking back and looking at my own experience with this, I guess I would say I've seen companies move both too slow and too fast when it comes to this. So there's examples where, as Grace said, a lot of this is not necessarily about cloud because it's been around for a long time. It's more the architectural aspects of your systems and moving from monoliths to microservices, or more of a cloud native approach. And in the past, I've absolutely seen cases where we've moved too quickly, in the sense that we tried to rewrite or recreate a monolith with microservices. But number one, a large scale system rewrite, it always comes with a tremendous number of risks, even if it's very attractive to think. Gosh, we can solve all these problems that we've had if we only, anytime you hear the words, if we
Let's
could
start from scratch.
What's that?
Let's start from scratch. Let's redo this whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. If we could shed ourselves of this legacy burden that we have, and I think that's a trap many people fall in when they think about moving from monolithic to microservices, from cloud as data center to cloud native. And that's one thing where I think people move too fast, where they start to move too quickly. I've seen absolutely cases where we didn't think through enough in front to say, what does this look like for us? What investments do we need to make up front from an operational perspective? So we know how to operate a monolith that runs on n number of servers, but what is it if we start to break that up? It's going to potentially be exponential, and as we scaling characteristics that are needed. And I'm not thinking about Netflix at this point, because Netflix has gone through this journey, but Netflix operates at a scale that's in many ways different from many companies. So I'm kind of, for myself, looking at a previous experience or two that I've had at a moderate or smaller scale, where we got down the road of trying to be more cloud native, but it really started to grind us to a halt in a lot of ways, because we hadn't invested in some of the shared tooling or common we really didn't think about the leverage points that we would need to have. And so it was a little bit like a Pandora's box, where as we walked down, it was great at the beginning, and as we walked down the road, I'm trying to think how to explain this without getting too detailed on the specifics, but as we walked down the road, changes became extremely difficult. Bad practices had permeated, and we didn't have mechanisms or abilities to broadly fix them through centralized tooling. And so as you start to think through, this is this problem space I'm talking about, of kind of a little bit moving too fast, where you have to think a little bit more ahead of time, put some investment in place to really help yourself scale your development practices down the road, not necessarily your systems. That's one thing. And I've seen people move too slow as well, in the sense of, similarly to kind of re-platforming or rewriting, you can move faster if you start to use a strangler pattern and pull pieces of your system out at a time. It enables you to really move a bit faster in smaller chunks, as opposed to moving too slow because you're trying to do it all. So those are two reflections that I would have.
No, I think that's great advice. Doing things piecemeal instead of trying to do a complete overhaul and then figuring out how to transition to that new thing. It's always quite a bit harder. One of the things that I would say here also is, don't try to scale or have an idea of how well your systems are running without actually measuring what's going on. I've worked in a couple of companies, and many times I found that we were trying to do a bunch of things that, if we had measured that before we started the process, we would have taken a completely different route. So I think people use cloud also as a that's a cost saving, a quick get to a place kind of thing. If you start out with dedicated servers in a co-location that you maintain yourself, and you have people to do that. That's quite a different story from having stuff in cloud, right? It's different attitudes, different knowledge on your systems, and everything that flows from it. I'm sure that Netflix went through all the stages.
Yes. I guess I'd also add that in the world of leveraging cloud services more, I mean, that typically will imply re-architecture of your system, like some kind of core rethinking of how things work. And there can be arguments made for why you might gain benefits from re-architecting certain parts of your system, but not others. So for example, Netflix, when Netflix went and moved into the cloud, it was the way that we leveraged AWS was a bit more, this is back in like the early 2010 timeframe, 2010, 2012. AWS, it was a bit more of a lift and shift. You know, we do things today inside a data center. Now we can do those same things in the cloud. And they started to look at how do we leverage things like auto scaling or other characteristics that cloud offers, that AWS offers in that case. But there's still many systems that are homegrown or built based on Netflix's needs that if we would have also looked at how we could re-architect some of those pieces, these are where the sort of the business pressures fall in, the overall timelines, and you have to think about what parts of your system would benefit from more immediate action, more immediate re-architecture, what parts of your system can you revisit later and come back to and really leverage cloud services. In a previous company, we ran Kafka ourselves internally. And there was no real reason for us to actually do that, except that's what we had been doing. And so changing that meant that we had to change other parts of our system as well. And so it was a more complex change, and that just took more time.
Yeah, that all seems to come down to what level of growth are you in with your team or your company, right? And I think that's every level of growth has its different approaches, both from the engineering perspective, but also from the business sense. Do I want to have people that monitor my Kafka cluster? Or do I just pay a cloud provider to have messaging infrastructure ready to go for me, right? Grace, can you share a little bit of what you think you can look into when evaluating the different types of levels of growth, the size of your project, and how that affects using cloud?
Yes, I think the advice on that one will be really like, you have the big picture in mind, what's the goal you want to achieve, but starting from small, from your, the level you want to try out from technology and from the service, what service you can use, right? So there are all these service providers, they provide all different level for those, and study those and study similar case as your company and try out those. And you can also think about from a software developer perspective, there are many resources you can use, right? So take Intel example, we have the development cloud, which you can try out some of the software acceleration and optimization, and just purely as developer, but you can start from small, and eventually you can host those service, or your company choose any service provider or the cloud, or you host by yourself. That's all your choice. But you really want to see the technology or optimization you can leverage or you can take for your usage, right? It can be AI or lots of data processing kind of thing, or you can have the database usage, or sometimes it's really about you want to know you might not know what platform really your software will running on, but the backend is running on the CPU or the platform, and there are many accelerations you actually can use and be leveraged as well. So as I said, use those resources in your software. So maybe you have a bottleneck and the performance-wise you see that one, but moving to here actually will use those can speed those up, right? And as I said, starting from small, really from business perspective, thinking about which one you want to try out, and also from data privacy or security perspective, maybe you want to have a kind of architecture split to keep something running internally first. If you are, I know many company or enterprise, they are very much caring about this portion. But we also have technology which actually can protect your data. So we have the confidential computing, so which can use if you're running on public cloud or the hybrid cloud. So think about those, but all can try out step by step, and then coming back to build from business perspective, building a overall plan how you want to really migrate or set up, or for your cloud or applications. So yeah.
Yeah. So would you then say, so if I start out small, I tend to use more of the let's say the standard offerings from the various cloud providers, like the Kafka example that we just talked about, and then maybe later flesh out whether that is something that I want to keep paying for directly with all the overhead that incurs, or do I start wanting to run that myself if my business has grown enough for me to pay for the people that maintain it and so on. Is that a bit what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Aaron?
Yeah, I think it's hard to accurately estimate the amount of operational overhead and cost that comes from running your own systems versus leveraging systems that are deeply invested in by cloud providers.
Right.
And yeah, I think that's not a consideration that's often really thought about. It can be thought about, but I think that's an important consideration at every stage. And I totally agree with Grace about starting small and like learning, exploring, growing in that for sure.
And also when you design your system, right, especially moving to the cloud native, thinking about from this API exposure perspective, what's the internal one, what's external, and also you want to leverage the standard methodology like the RESTful API, gRPC, all these are very standard, and there are many resources you can use if you have this standard API or methodology, right? And also thinking about if you want to really set up this or your development cycle wise internally, you might have a different engineering sub team for different modules. So you have this CI/CD or development ops to automate the process and separate them. They can do these things independently, module by themselves, and upgrade and the developer and testing and integration, right? But overall, the system can also automate things in between. When one module update, the other part also work together with a new updated version. So thinking about all this kind of thing, and including how your testing and validation internal. I'm not talking about going to the public use already. So internally, before you really upgrade or release, what the testing cycle should looks like to leveraging all these pieces, but really empower the component team or the sub team. They can do things by themselves, and they can be microservice, for this piece, and they have that flexibility to fix issues and upgrade and improve performance. And so leverage all of this, but design your stream or work stream to include all these elements, and your engineering team can be very effective, eventually. So.
Right. So it's basically regarding each team as like an external entity that you have to have contracts with in terms of APIs, or the way that systems work together, so that they can work independently, rather than considering all at once and having to have a very complicated release procedure to account for all the various changes that might be. I think that's a great point. Also kind of curious, I mean, all of you worked with open source, and you will find that if you start using open source, that you might sometimes find that the piece of software that you're using as part of your own project doesn't quite do exactly what you want it to do. So how do you deal with incorporating open source in a way that that you can also benefit, of course, still from that open source project improvements, while also ensuring that your own needs are met. Do you have any good tips on this?
Maybe I can start first. So, so for open source, I think if you are looking for open source for your product, of course you start with the relatively stable release or stable version of the release, and look at those and really see how that can be used or integrate or leverage by your project. But also, I will very much encourage you to join and participate and pay attention to the continued development for that open source project. So you may choose a stable version, which will release like last year or half a year ago or 2 years ago, even like depends. Most of them actually, I think half year or several months ago, they will relatively have a stable version. Or you try the distribution version from the distribution company, which will be even more productized, right? But really pay attention to the upstream development and participate, especially for the area that you think will be you will be able to leverage more, or you want to see how this technology trend will go. So I will very much encourage you to do that. And also, there are lots of innovation ideas as well. People will discuss in that open source community. And when you first join the community, you might feel, oh, it's at least very normal. You feel lost. It's a huge and it's a big, and you really need to find. But once you join, especially the sub team or sub forum or project level, you will get a sense how that community looks like through the email discussion or the regular meeting or the technology or wiki page. Just look at the GitHub page and regarding the technology and what they have done in last few times or few months of the technology, and you join those discussions. So don't be afraid to join and don't be afraid to ask. But don't be frustrated if your questions are not answered, because people are busy. The maintainers can be very busy, and they are very much like lots of projects or open source, they are really meritocracy based. So if you are very new to this community, it's very easy to say, hey, I don't know what this person really asks and what he or she wants. And so it's easy. It's you are ignored. So don't be frustrated, but still very much passionate to join, continue. And there are many very great engineers there. They are all engineers. Remember, they're all engineers. So don't be frustrated. They are people like you. So just be part of them. And eventually, if you do something and gradually, so yeah, well, you'll get noticed, and your patch will be merged, and your contribution or your question will get asked answered. So, and you can help to answer that other people's question as well, and share your best known methodology with other software engineers as well. That will be build your credit as well, because you contribute, no matter it's code or answers or your usage as well. So I really encourage you doing that. Yeah.
Cool. Aaron, do you?
Yeah, Grace covered it. Grace covered it.
Most of it, yeah.
Yeah. I guess the things that came to mind that might be complementary to what Grace already added as thinking about open source is when I've thought back around. So in my past, I've worked at large enterprises. I've worked with startups and at a startup, and I've worked at medium scale or scale up companies, as well as now Netflix at higher scale, more mature company. And it's interesting to see so I'm going to approach this maybe not from engaging with open source, because Grace, you covered that extremely well, but more, how do you think about your open source strategy, and how does that integrate? How do you marry that up with like a cloud services strategy, or how you think about that from a systems perspective? And I guess what I've observed and what I would say is that there's a different set of ways that you should be thinking at it. This is true of all things. There's a different sort of criteria set or different ways of thinking about the problem or the approach at every stage of a company and every stage of a project, or where you're at. And you think about it from the business perspective, funding, organizational and team. And I think one commonality is that open source obviously represents a tremendous leverage point. I mean, you can align with a community, you can lift the tide to raise all boats in the process. There's like a tremendous, I mean, I hope I don't need to say that out loud. This is like something that we know at this point. When I think about startups, especially startups and maybe scale ups, as one of the encouraging things in the more recent past is as cloud providers align more with larger or more successful open source projects, you can start to see this benefit that sort of comes between them, where investing in open source doesn't diverge you from leveraging cloud solutions. It starts to converge, and that's a really huge benefit. And for smaller companies, and especially smaller teams and products working at smaller scales, there's huge amounts of value you can gain from engaging with the open source community, leveraging the systems and tools that are produced, their integrations with cloud providers. Like you can do a lot of really amazing things to a very significant scale very quickly as a result. And then you can also reinvest in those open source projects as well. I would say that as things continue to scale even higher, you have other calculus, other considerations, which are where your business needs and requirements might diverge from or align with open source projects. And when those things start to come into conflict, now you have different decisions to make around how you think about open source. Are you Grace, I loved how you put that. Like, as you think about it, are you able to communicate to or contribute to the community? Not every open source community is equivalent in the ability to influence it or to engage. I'm not saying that they're bad, but just they're different. You have to think about that. And then also you have other strategies you can take. You can fork, you can patch, you can do a bunch of other things. All of those come with investment needs, funding, team impact, things like that. Those tend to show themselves at the upper end of scale, typically, is what I've found, where many open source projects work great broadly. And it's when you start to push on their edges or boundaries that you have to make some decisions and think about it. Specifically at Netflix, I think about our investments that we've made in the Mesos and Kubernetes communities. And as we've replatformed our infrastructure from Mesos to Kubernetes over time, there's just different considerations that we make. There's different ways we engage. And those are all parts of how we think about, we factor those in as we think about our team and our goals and how we approach it.
That is cool. That's some great advice there. I know that contributing sometimes is challenging, but it's always rewarding in general. And but also starting your own open source project from your little startup and then feeling the engagement from others is equally rewarding if you can indeed spend the time to engage with that community. It's a back and forth kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I can maybe share a little bit more experience or my observation regarding when if you start a new open source project in the open source community, right? So thinking about, like I said, first, what's this project is the problem solving, whether there's any other things you want to leverage. You don't want to start everything from scratch. But if you have a unique point, unique thing you want to solve, you can think about whether there's you want to join a community or join one existing project. So don't think you always need to start things from scratch by yourself, because you do want to have a community. You do want to have people, not only your engineer, your company engineer, but also other company will reuse and contribute as well. So think about those. And as if you every project actually is moving and evolving. So if you have those innovation ideas and there's a existing project, pretty naturally maybe they will welcome, or you can part of that, and they will welcome those. But be open for all these possibilities, and also open, maybe you will set up this by yourself. But if you set up by yourself from pretty early, so you want to engage with other company or community, not necessarily immediately become go to a community, become incubated or sandbox or everything, because it's not easy. It's a lot of a process you need to go through. But you want to engage to see whether there are other upper level, lower level software ingredient that you can work with, and also if any other company wants to join to be part of your project. Lots of times, if one company hosted or only purely one company open source project, it may be very hard to get the attention or eventually last very long. That's my observation. Not saying it will then fail, right? But think about it's a community, and also as I said, the existing community depends on the situation. Some can be very mature and large scale, and it takes time for you to participate involve. But some can be starting, and that starting stage, and welcome lots of contributions. The large, they also welcome, but it's just relatively you get attention, you get. But I think it's my experience with open source is great. So you definitely try out those and build your experience as well. So.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's cool. Well, we've blown through time. It's going so fast. I think we can spend hours here with these two guests here. But I also wanted to give the audience a bit of opportunity to ask some questions. So let's see if we have some questions ready.
All right, it's good to be back up here. So this is Blake. I'll help you out on the Q&A. And so while we're waiting on the questions, so one of the big kind of questions we heard leading into this is like, hey, I'm working in cloud as an engineering manager or leader. What are like some tips that y'all have for managing teams, right? So we're talking about building cloud at scale, but also like, what are some of the things you learn in helping to manage these teams to help us get there?
Aaron, do you want to start?
I'll throw out a couple of ideas. I think having I've been in the industry for 22 years at this point, and observed going from the introduction and growth of cloud. And one of the biggest benefits that I hope everybody would agree with me on, is that kind of what Grace called out earlier, is the ability for teams to be more autonomous, for them to kind of own. If you can provide the right level of tooling or the right level of foundation that sort of builds your company's practices or your collective needs. I think of things like in AWS, managing accounts and tagging and some of these like foundational pieces to understand how you're using the cloud, or how you're using AWS in this case. Empowering teams is so much more. You're so much more capable at empowering teams, and that's one of the things in Netflix that's made Netflix successful in using the cloud, is this philosophy of we're not telling people how to do their job and how to manage their infrastructure. We will help provide best practices. We call it the paved path. We will enable people to do common things easily and smoothly. But there's so much possibility. There's so much autonomy and power that people can have as teams. And as a manager of a team, leaning into that and sort of balancing, helping the team to understand what the right level of foundational investment is for future success, because you can easily kind of, like I said, open Pandora's box and get into a bad state later. But really opening it up and enabling them and empowering them is huge. And specifically, my recent background is in platform and infrastructure teams. And there's a lot that we have to offer as what we call local central teams, to enable engineering teams to run really fast while not having to think about, SOC compliance or other common problems that we can kind of solve at a lower level. So empowering teams and leveraging cloud services and infrastructure and capabilities to do that, I think, is huge as a manager who can empower the team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with what Aaron said. I can share a little bit more experience if you're a manager, right? So if you are like a first line or manager, or very close, or even second line, you are very closely with engineering. So you should. My advice to you is really look at how this similar, like Aaron said, in power, but you want to look at it from engineering daily and process wise, anything that in parallel or not in parallel, how you can from process-wise automate and speed up those kind of things to make this development work efficient, while you still give the engineer the empowerment for them to do their work well. But if you are more like looking several ingredient or several subsystem thing manager, so I think you need to pay a lot of attention to this interaction with all this component ingredient, and especially connect that with the business requirements or business needs, because you as a software engineering expert, you actually can make those business requirements maybe more efficient. They look at the business people perspective. There are these several things, but can convert that into this technical conversion for the engineering conversion. So think about that and make your organization more effective. So yeah.
Great. And then also, like in chat, I'll put it up on the screen. Kyoki says, I love how Grace emphasizes as we all can contribute to open source projects. So thanks for that, Kyoki. And then we got some, it looks like an on-prem question. So this is a little bit more Netdata perspective or specific. So Ralph, probably for this one, I think it's more on-prem. So Adrian says, tried to use Netdata a few years ago on large production, finance related. I needed some more collector like swab info or pagery info for our needs. Developers and communities were very welcoming. And then the last part of what he said, the company I work for very quickly saw the power of Netdata, and now it's the standard solution, and we're looking for on-premises MetaCloud and paid support.
Okay, yeah, those are some great comments. Not actual questions, but thanks for that support, and yeah, looking forward to being able to even better support our users there.
Great, thanks for that, Ralph. And then more specific from Biggie Z. So any plans for monitoring on Kubernetes? I mean, focusing more on K8s. Currently, K8's portion is quite a few in Netdata, in their opinion.
Yes. So we do have some let's say preliminary support for Kubernetes and container-based environments in general that we are indeed looking at expanding on. So you have better insight in those kinds of setups. I agree that we can do a bit better there still. Been traditionally focused on individual nodes, and now we're moving into this space. And there is some support there where you can see all the metrics from C groups and so on. But the representation could be, of course, as always, could be improved upon. So we will be doing that going forward because our user base also, we can see that increasingly they start using Kubernetes more. So of course we want to help out there as well. Thanks for the question.
And then just kind of a general feedback here from Angelo says, still learning, so not really ready to raise a question. Hey, we totally get that. And just they wanted to send greetings to the team. Excellent job. So they just really loved what they saw today. So thanks for that feedback for our panel today, Angelos. And then we got from Costas a question for the panel today. So Costas asks, any tips or strategies for cost saving on cloud infrastructure when things start getting a bit costly?
I think that's a great question. Indeed, some cloud offerings are quite a bit expensive if you really start using them without you necessarily noticing. I'm sure that our two guests have some views on this.
I'm happy to jump in real quick on that. Yeah, this has been a topic that has touched my teams and my role across multiple companies now. And it's interestingly, it's different at every size and scale and what you're thinking about. So I think there's some foundational sort of table stakes. And most of my experience has been with AWS. So I won't speak to how like Azure or GCP does some of these things, but from an AWS perspective, this is where no matter what stage you're at, having a little bit of upfront thought around how you're managing your accounts, because accounts are a unit of sort of separation and isolation. That's important to be thinking about upfront, as well as making sure you're tagging your resources appropriately, so that later, because here's what I've experienced is later you go back to look and you have no idea. You can look at your overall costs, but you don't know why they're, how to break it down, where the costs are coming from, except at a level of granularity that's potentially not useful. So starting early with some tagging will really help you. But in most cases, I guess I would say my experience is there's usually some pretty significant low-hanging fruit or meaningful low-hanging fruit. I think there's in Netflix, we're the most professional, the best quality of looking at cost in the cloud that I've ever experienced. That's a tremendous amount of investment internally at Netflix. It's a tremendous amount of impact. It's worth that investment. At other companies, we've been able to look at it at a bit more of a big picture level and identify some low-hanging fruit and make a huge impact. And that was very meaningful for those companies. And a friend of mine is Corey Quinn. I'll always put in a pitch for the Duckbill Group and his cost, the work that they do around billing and managing your bill with AWS. I'll pitch that every day, all day, because it's super valuable. And they really take a pragmatic view on balancing that. But yeah, a lot of low hanging fruit that can be found. And I'd say aim yourself at understanding that. Make sure you've got good tagging in place so you understand how your costs are breaking down and where they come from. And then don't overinvest on trying to nickel and dime the costs until you have like business use cases that really drive some of that.
Great advice, Grace.
Yeah, I think the strategy is really separate the critical microservice pieces from that nice to, I cannot say nice to have, everything's critical, but more critical, less critical pieces, and use the service provider different strategy or different level of support for those pieces, right? That may be the key in terms of the cost saving, but it's really various situations. So I think learning from the, sometimes you're learning from your lesson, but also learn from the other people's lesson as well. So there's always I think the service provider, once you choose them, they also have a good teaching or learning to tell you what they offer, and you leverage those as well, and the solutions like from the different company, right? So those will be very good as well. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I want to add a little bit on specifically what Aaron said around tagging. I think that's indeed crucial to figuring out where your costs are coming from. But another thing is also to look at, for example, your storage. If the storage that you're using, for example, for your database matches up with what you actually logically are storing there. One of the things that we recently found is that the total size of your storage for a particular database might be magnitudes larger than the actual data that it holds by things like point in time snapshots, backups, so on, that you might not actually need, or not as long as that it's configured for by default or something like that. And that also sometimes the allocated storage doesn't go down. You can only go up. These are things that probably apply to all kinds of hosted services that you should really take into account while looking at your cost.
Great, thanks for that. And then from Anatoly, we got more of a Netdata specific question from Anatoly. Does Netdata provide integration with GCP Stackdriver? Will Netdata agent installed within GCP be able to report to Stackdriver natively, or would it require extra development?
To be honest, I don't have the answer to this, but we will try to find this for you and answer it outside of the call here.
All right, great. And then just kind of wrapping up with today. So if everyone wants to go around, so what's kind of exciting that while we have everybody here, what's going on with Intel, Netflix, anything y'all want to say that on your side, any cool things that people should know about?
So maybe I can start from our side. So Intel actually building a lot of cloud native related software ingredient and solutions. So we contribute the ingredient into the upstream, and we have solutions also. So we are not just the CPU or platform company. We're also software, lots of software. Engineers working at Intel, and we are very active in the open source, especially in my world. Lots of things happening in the CNCF or Kubernetes and service mesh, all this cloud native project. So we're seeing the big trend of the microservice architecture, and we are very excited on the journey. Yeah.
Yeah, from a Netflix perspective, very similar in some of those fronts. We're doing some really interesting, solving some interesting engineering problems at scale these days across. Now we've expanded out into multiple business units, so we're solving not just engineering problems for large scale streaming, but also content creation and studio. So Netflix is producing a ton of original content. We're looking at how do we make that the best process it can be to really do innovative things for creatives producing new content. So there's a lot of interesting engineering challenges there that are orthogonal to maybe some of the streaming side. And then now we're expanding into gaming as well, as has been publicly talked about, and as you can play them yourself. So a lot of interesting engineering challenges happening across the board for us. From my perspective in cloud infrastructure, we're doing some really innovative and interesting things around the application of machine learning to resource management and efficiency within our Kubernetes infrastructure, Kubernetes-based infrastructure. So a lot of really big, interesting problems being solved across the board at Netflix, almost all leveraging open source, but also we open source our own solutions as well.
Yeah, and the one thing I want to point the people to, our resources from for software developer, right? We have this open.intel.com, so which have lots of solutions or best known methodology regarding the technology we develop. Lots of them are cloud or like the AI workload or the tools or the graphics. So we have many software, open software, solutions and the resources for you to reference as well. So, yeah.
Okay, great. I got those links into the chat. There's a Netflix tech blog. Wasn't aware of that, so that's really cool. Thanks for sharing that, Aaron. And then open.intel.com, we got that in there. We got a Netdata meetup tomorrow with Iago, so check that out. Links in the chat. And I'll let it turn it over to Ralph to take us out. Anything exciting you want to mention, Ralph, or summarize for today? The floor is yours to close us out. And thanks to Aaron and Grace. This has been amazing.
Well, as I said before we went to Q&A, I think we could talk for hours. We had some more possible topics that we could have covered, and would have easily taken another few hours with the great enthusiasm that you are able to talk about these topics. So thank you very much for this. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Blake, for setting this up again, and hope to see you guys soon.
Thanks for having us. Very much appreciated. It's great to talk.
Yeah, thank you. So happy to join the conversation. So.
Cool.